In today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Richard Fontenot, a seasoned professional with an impressive career in the entertainment industry. Richard has worked on BAFTA, Emmy, and the Academy Award winning productions with major studios like Universal Pictures, 20th Century Fox, and the Warner Brothers. Notably, he contributed to the story treatment for Tropic Thunder and worked on iconic projects like Frasier, The Italian Job, and Rush Hour 2. Beyond entertainment, Richard is also an expert in behavioral health with training in mindfulness from Ookla and neuroscience for business from MIT. He consults with leaders, creatives, and executives to help them overcome challenges and thrive. We're thrilled to have Richard here to share his unique insights into both storytelling and leadership. Welcome to Career Dynamo, the podcast where we explore the evolving career landscape. I am Marwa, and my journey started in Cairo in 2004, leading me to Berlin in 2020. With extensive experience in human resources development, career counseling, and HR restructuring, I now specialize in neurocoaching. My coaching methodology combines insights from psychology and neuroscience, and I help individuals transform their career and life by training the brain, benefiting from the brain plasticity, and direct the brain to achieve their goals and make conscious decisions. I host experts who provide valuable insights and strategies for professional growth. Whether you're a leader aiming to make an impact or a professional seeking career advancement, Career Dynamo is your go-to destination for mastering success. Richard, you have a truly unique story. Could you start by telling us a bit about your journey from working with Emmy and Academy award winning production teams to becoming an executive coach and psychotherapist?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for having me on your show today. I've always had a fascination with the mind and brain and storytelling. And so I was very fortunate enough to be hired as a producer's assistant and casting assistant working for Paramount Studios, which had TV shows on NBC, such as Frasier. And I was able to work on a Norman Lear pilot, which was actually written for Janet Jackson, as well as Tom Selleck. He had a pilot that was going. He eventually ended up doing Blue Bloods, which is a pretty popular TV show that's been on for more than 10 years. So, I had a lot of creativity and a lot of storytelling going on. And so I was always interested in how people tell stories. And then I had the opportunity to get into directing a short film and a Pepsi spec commercial and had a really wonderful time. So, I was launching in that way of, creating my own material. And then I had other opportunities to then work on feature films. Some were, smaller $10 million budget films. Some, went up to $100 million, really. So, and I was working for directors and producers. So, so I was definitely getting all this great experience that I always wanted. And I also spent some time in New York City for a few summers working on um, promoting theater projects. So I was going back and forth between New York and Los Angeles, and I did a stint in working on music videos and commercials as well in New Orleans. So I'm working, like New York City sometimes, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and also New Orleans. So, really gave me a broad picture of, what work is like in storytelling across the United States. So I finally, I wrap up and ended up going back to Los Angeles because I had a job offer from a friend to produce a small independent film. And that person, her husband worked for the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. So they're the people who, give out the Oscars. And he wanted to direct his second small short film. So, and so I was very happy to be a part of that. And then so I jumped aboard as a producer. And in that process, his wife started telling me that she was going back to graduate school and she was interested in studying clinical psychology. So after hearing her story of, going through, the difficult film business, and wanting to pivot into clinical psychology, I said, that's something that resonates with me. And I took that leap, from, while producing, an independent film. I started graduate school and studying clinical psychology.
Mhm. Um, can you explain the concept of narrative medicine and how it informs your coaching approach? Because your story somehow for me, that's a big transition from media, movies, and production to uh, 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 narrative medicine and coaching. Can you explain the concept of this approach? Because it's somehow new to us in the Middle East. We don't know anything about the narrative medicine, at least for me. But I need to know more about the concept of the narrative medicine.
Sure, absolutely. So a lot of people think, wow, narrative medicine or filmmaking and coaching and psychotherapy are like on two different edges of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's really about telling stories on one end and hearing stories on one end. And then, so depending on your approach, like in narrative medicine, we're hearing patients' stories and we're also encouraging them to reframe how they see their lives, especially when someone who is constantly going to hospital has diagnosis, and they might tend to just look at all of the negative and see themselves as like a cancer patient or as a mental health patient or a depressed patient. And so narrative medicine falls under the auspices of medical humanities. So it's an artistic approach of understanding from a client or patient from a holistic perspective, because it focuses on the storytelling coming from sort of what that patient or client brings into the room. So it's either writing some story with that person, or maybe listening to some music, and how does that
Mhm.
music affect the person, and writing music for the person. So it involves not only sort of that emotional part of the brain, which becomes overloaded. So it's like I say, it's the right mode of the brain. If I were a neurosurgeon, we would just say right brain, because they recognize that there's, capacities of the right brain that's very different from the left brain. A neuroscientist would say, no, it's actually on both sides of the brain, this, emotions and artistic expression, because the brain blood flow goes back and forth. So to keep it simple, I'll use like right mode instead of, falling into one of those categories. But I am more of a neuroscientist, of course. And so narrative medicine can be used with individuals, groups, couples, divisions of companies, communities, organizations. And it is also another aspect of looking at how health and social facts are told in the broader medium, such as in television and films, across all writing platforms. So it's making sure that medical stories are depicted accurately throughout television and news. So a lot of people who have MDs or are journalists with a background in narrative medicine are called upon to, talk as the voice of medicine on news stations, across the United States. I'm not sure so much about Europe, but I'm pretty sure we're probably the same. So there are many components and tools from narrative medicine that are used with clients in coaching. So I flow between using the narrative medicine and performance psychology and helping clients achieve their best, achieving optimum health. So my background is in studying narrative medicine over at Harvard Medical School. I studied clinical psychology, and I also studied marriage and family therapy. So I have all of these sort of aspects that I like using, as well as sort of certification in neuroscience for business, from MIT Sloan. So these are very powerful lenses that I use when trying to get into that narration of the patient's life. And it's
Mhm.
really convincing them to not focus so much on the right mode of the emotions, but also accessing parts of the left mode, such as logic and language. So it's really like being able to integrate with whole brain functioning, really. Because if you're just emotional about a diagnosis, then you're using too much of the right mode and you are flooding the rest of the brain so that you're not able to access the creativity, the logic, and sort of the language. And so developing language, I think, is very important for a patients because again, they might get in that mindset of just thinking, doctors and diagnosis. And so we know that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that sum of the part in narrative medicine would be like, I'm not just going to be, a depressed patient, I'm not just a cancer patient, so these are aspects, but drawing upon, their wins, what have they done in their lives and expanding sort of that in their mind. Because when you're in an illness or you're having struggles as in a corporation, some people might tend to be flooded again with the right mode. And so they're losing the capacity of whole brain functioning. So, it's using journalism, op-eds, poetry. Some people would even draw comic strips, write screenplays, listening to composing music. So that's the healing process of narrative medicine.
And that's easy for them to write a story, for example. That's easy for them.
So depending on what their background is, because I do work with creatives who are very accustomed to writing stories. And so, in one way or another, it is encouraging to start at some type of a place. So it might be journaling, like doing you might do a morning journal of sort of what is your story looking like. We might do a mood journal, sort of like how is your mood being affected? How are you eating? What are some challenges you have in the day? What is your mindset? Also, gratitude. So practicing a gratitude journal is something that I would start with as well, and goals. So, you start somewhere and I take them from where they are and, grow them from their ability level.
Mhm. Right. Neuroscience, specifically neuroplasticity concept and neuroscience insights and its application is a rapidly evolving field. How do you stay up to date on new discoveries and integrate them into your coaching sessions?
Yeah, so I stay up to date by keeping an eye out for study groups on the latest neuroscience research, such as, learning about the MIT Sloan management program. So, neuroscience for business. So, that is an example where key universities are at the forefront of making the biggest impact on the field. So I want to be in those groups. And I also stay up to date with the research of Daniel Amen, who has Amen Clinics, which, he is purportedly the person who has seen the most brains, doing more than 250,000 brain scans. So, he has some really great elements of science. Dan Siegel, who also spoke in the MIT Sloan School of Management program about interpersonal neurobiology. So he again, has a big study team and puts out books every year about mindfulness and how to be awake and awaken the self, so that you're understanding, what's happening in your life, as well as Ellen Langer. She just put out a book this year. She's over at Harvard. And so I use this with clients because I know that I can show them what the research says about understanding your brain. So for example, in leadership, there's a researcher by the name of Matthew Lieberman who wrote a book called Social. And so he did a study about, the brain and neuroscience and said that analytical leaders have a 14% approval rating as being a great leader. So if they're analytical, 14% says you're going to be a great leader. If you're communicative and empathetic, then you have a 12% chance of being labeled as a great leader. However, knowing that when you combine both the analytic side of the brain as well as the empathetic, empathic communicative part of the brain, then it becomes 70%. And so when I can tell people who come see me that people will take their leadership in another, to looking at it as another level, then it's really about, learning what's happening internally and disseminating that information so that the leaders can be most effective.
Hmm. Um, Given your background, do you find that the specific challenges faced by actors writers, and performers require a different coaching approach that incorporates neuroscience?
That's a really good question. So I do see some creatives and sometimes have to use a different method, but not all the time and not to the degree that it takes up, too much time in the conversation, with the client, about their challenges and changes. So as I said, sort of in the beginning, people would think, oh, you're in the film and entertainment TV shows is on one side of the spectrum and, behavioral medicine, neuroscience, psychotherapy is on another, but really, it's still we're dealing with the brain. So it's really important to hear that person's story about themselves and find out where is there room for improvement to be made. And then tailoring that coaching with neuroscience or clinical psychology or narrative medicine. So we talk about, the brain as having neuroplasticity. So everyone has the ability to rewire the brain and gain brain agility. So, leaving the old thought patterns behind. So, I do come from a creative background and people do seek me out because of that, history that I have, because I do understand that process entirely. And, it's really teaching whoever comes in and sits with me, that, hey, a part of the broad goals are raising self-awareness, improving productivity, and learning to have emotional control. So whether it's a C-suite executive or a software engineer or a YouTuber or a writer for a hit TV show, it's still I craft what is going to be the most useful for them, really. So, and doing that, we talk about like incorporating logic, balancing it with emotions, creativity, motivation, and mind-body connections that we know is called interoception. So, and then we get, and as I said before, we sort of, can get into the journaling, the storytelling, and that's really to explore hindsight, foresight, as well as their insight.
Mhm. And what's people's reaction when they know that they can change their brain? They can literally change their brain.
Mhm.
What
Absolutely.
what's the reaction?
Oh,
Do they
wow.
believe that from the first sight?
Yes. So well, that's really good. So in usually when we first meet, it's just really developing sort of like a plan of action, or a treatment plan. And so it's really talking in depth about their challenges, their experiences, and their goals. So in doing that, I explain to them what I do, and I tell them what the research says because I was involved in a study group over at UCLA, and they have, a published study where they saw teenagers who were diagnosed with ADHD. And,
Mm,
the parents were really sick of just giving medicine to the kids. They wanted another solution. So UCLA did a pre-study of doing an fMRI, functional magnetic resonant imaging of the brain of the participants, and a post study. So, we were doing mindfulness techniques and we could see changes in the brain. So if you go back, you can, they identified areas of the brain that was built up because the brain is like a muscle. So when people come to me, I say, listen, if you were hiring me to be a personal trainer, it's sort of me giving you the tools, coaching you, explaining to you sort of the process. And it's really on you if you want to practice more when in between sessions. So, and how you come in. And, it's, so we've seen it. And so they're very surprised in hearing that research about how the brain can change. So it isn't like from 100 years ago where, psychotherapy, you could report feeling better. It's not only a subjective experience anymore. It is objective through that high level
yeah.
of science. So they are very motivated into, employing sort of the process of working through, their challenges. And, we know that those areas of the brain are important, and when they grow, that people have a reduction of stress. If they are stressed out, there is a refractory period where they recover from that stress. It's improved learning and memory, as well as self-realization. So this is why people come to see myself and other coaches and psychotherapists, because they are looking for some type of growth.
Great. And how do you adapt your performance uh, medicine session style to address the specific challenges and goals for each client?
So I do a really good conversation with them about challenges, experiences, and goals. And so we talk about the goals that we can achieve together, and we talk about their challenges. We talk about if they have done any coaching or therapy before, and if they did, what did they like about that process? Because there are many different theoretical ways of handling, psychotherapy and different lenses. And so I want to hear them. What was something that worked? Because I have a big array of tools that can be used in working with people to achieve their goals. So, what is it they liked about that person? And what have they learned about trying to achieve optimum health? So it's really about understanding their story and how we can put that puzzle together, and it can even go back to, what kind of medication they're taking, how that worked for them, as well as maybe, if they're taking any type of prescribed medication, or if they're doing any drinking or even caffeine and drug consumption. So we talk about that. We talk about, what are their family's emotional challenges? How are they sleeping? What are some interests they have? Are they feeling guilty about anything recently? How is their energy? So when I'm discussing these things, then I'm able to get into more detail about how to create healthy habits and work on the gratitude list and work on their accomplishments and discuss their achievements and their proud moments.
Great. And you also work with couples and teams. How can neuroscience inform coaching in these groups settings?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So first and foremost, so couple and group work, teamwork, I tell them in the very beginning that this has to be collaborative. So it's no longer just me. We're not talking about the other person being as one, but we're talking about combining. So it's we, if we're talking together, it's we are talking. But we're going to combine that, as Dan Siegel says, as muy. So it's not just me and it's not just we, but it's muy. So that is a collaborative approach. And it is something that's from a neuroscientific model. And so I apply this sort of discussion to couples and teams and talking about, why we need oxytocin. So oxytocin is the collaborative and bonding chemical that makes us feel good around other people. So that's something that we want to look out for regarding, how we talk to other people. So, and that's an important detail. Whereas the opposite of oxytocin is cortisol. So that is not going to create bonding. It's going to be it's a stress chemical that's released when the body is detecting a certain danger. So if you've ever been in a meeting with somebody and they leave and you feel completely drained after the meeting, it could be that there isn't any bonding and collaboration taking place, and that's eliciting the fight, flight, faint, or freeze model in the limbic region. So we get into the neuroscience, and I break this down. I said, this is what's happening, and we talk about ways how teams and businesses replicate neuroscience and what we know about neuroscience for business. So for example, we have this myelin sheath inside of the brain that is designed to speed up process. So we can talk about, like, in business, efficiency and effectiveness. And then we can break down in another area of the brain, there's synapses. So what is that used for? It's used for communicating. It's used for communicating, among neurons. And then in business, communication with key stakeholders, should trigger trust and excitement. They should have that bonding hormone of oxytocin. And it's about finding the right balance of trust and excitement to maintain motivation. Because if you're having high levels of oxytocin with motivation, it's going to lead to increased innovation, and then there's neurogenesis. So that's how is the couple or the team cultivating and nurturing those steps to innovation.
Great. And can you share with us how you integrate neuroscience into your performance medicine sessions practice, particularly considering your background in narrative medicine and positive psychology?
Yes, absolutely. So from a neuroscientific perspective, I mentioned interpersonal neurobiology. So it fits really richly into the neuroscience for business. And also when I'm working with couples or individuals, so I really like using that IP and B approach, interpersonal neurobiology approach, because I can look at ideas across sciences. So not only psychology, not only performance medicine, not only narrative medicine, cultural psychology, cultural, anthropology, quantum physics, and of course, neuroscience. So this work expands across many different, disciplines, and it gives me a better perspective of what's happening and explaining why the brain is doing what it's doing, at certain times. So it's really tailoring the needs of, different people in different sectors. So, I tailor, needs based on their goals and examining their challenges. So if someone is working in a tech startup and having anxiety or self-esteem challenges, because most of them might be more, introverted, let's say, having an engineering mind, so that is, in general, they're not as in touch with their right mode for the emotions, or if they are, it's either too rigid or it'll be too chaotic if it's activated. So it's just talking about what's happening in situations, and how there are events that sometimes we can control, sometimes we can't. So if you look at a Venn diagram of ourselves and the rest of the world, where there's an interlapping piece that is small but is in existence, but there is much more in the world as events that happen that we cannot control. So it's really taking the aspect of challenging the individual, the team, the leader, to examine their beliefs. And so, I also use cognitive behavior therapy. So that's CBT, otherwise known.
Mm.
And in CBT, I break down this with my teams, leaders, or individuals, or couples, and say there's an A, B, C to what's happening inside of us and the rest of the world. So there's that A, activating event. And like I said, in general, we don't have control over this, which leads to a B, belief about that activating event, which then leads to the C, the consequence of their belief. So it's really getting in and expanding their windows of possibility in that B belief, because it's as if they have they might have a very highly reactive situation to things, that, if somebody loses their car keys, they'll have just this one thought process that keeps being repeated over and over again, which doesn't lead to a whole brain solution of thinking about the problem. And so finding the keys becomes harder because of the frustration and being flooded on the right mode, where the emotions are. So it's really, expanding the B in belief that I like using with all of my clients.
Mm. And from your point of view and from your experience, what exciting developments do you see on the horizon for the field of coaching, particularly the integration of neuroscience and other emerging disciplines?
Yeah, sure. So I think people are becoming more aware of everyday life struggles, and people are more open to talking to someone who's trained as a coach or therapist. So that means there are going to be more people who are going to benefit from neuroscience. And, because the way, lives are depicted, exposed, and replayed all over social media, we have a different way of looking at living, and we can, replay our mistakes, or replay someone's kind of humorous activity over social media. And we might be able to see ourselves as some of those people on the other side of the screen. So that's making us more self-aware. So the more self-aware that we might be becoming, then that's influencing our ideas of who we are as a person, and maybe wanting to change, and maybe wanting to achieve optimum mental awareness. So that's something that is because of the new technology, and in the way we communicate with one another. I think it's expanding sort of the possibilities that people can have. And so when you have more people interested in a particular culture or subject, then technology can grow to follow that. And I think that there are some very high sophisticated technologies that are just really too expensive for most people to benefit from, like, I mentioned Daniel Amen's clinic, and, to get involved with him and to actually see your brain. So the patients who have seen their brains, and I have some people that come to me from the clinics, um, have a different experience of like taking care of what they eat, of what sports they play. Because a lot of people in the US and Europe, it's called soccer in the US, football in Europe, so it's pretty dangerous, getting hit by, other people or, an object in the head. And so, people I think have a greater respect. So, and even so, the way technology is going, and because we can do the brain scans, which makes mindfulness to be more validated by people. So even recently, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, has approved a mindfulness training program. So it's starting to be used across all schools in California. So it gives me hope that government, corporations, schools, and families are seeing the benefits of raising one's self-awareness and learning that being hyper vigilant, which is again the right mode, flooding out the rest of the brain, is sometimes overreactive and is counterproductive to business and negotiations, policy setting, learning, teaching, and also, raising families.
Mhm. Right, and I think also in the military, I think.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. The military, that's another brilliant, brilliant way.
Mm. Okay. And with your background in storytelling, can you share any success stories or examples of how neuroscience informed performance medicine sessions have made a significant impact on the lives and the careers of your clients?
Yes, with keeping, of course, strict confidentiality, I can talk about working with a husband who was working as a teacher, and he was told by his wife that he needed therapy. So he was someone that took the advice of his wife. He wanted to work on himself and work on the marriage, and he felt that they were on the road to divorcing. So I was working with him how to improve his communication, and first focused on discovering his strengths, and then we built conversations around how to manage his emotions. Again, using narrative medicine, talking about his strengths, bring in clinical psychology and neuroscience to talk about what really is happening to ourselves regarding emotions, and how are we best able to tap into whole brain functioning, so that we're not in that fight, flight, faint, feign, or freeze mode, that we get in. And it's learning, like, breathing techniques and a mindfulness. And so he mentioned to me after 2 weeks that he felt a difference of the way that he could feel his negative emotions. And, when he's learning that this is a negative feeling that's kind of going on because of an event that's happening. And, he's used to jumping in, with negative words, negative actions, but just because you're feeling negative at the time, you really need to get into that moment, which he did, to pull him back into whole brain functioning and not saying things that he doesn't mean and will regret to say. So he sees himself stopping and not being, hit by that big wave. So it's really about, when we go to a beach, if some of us want to learn how to surf, it's really like being able to navigate the waves. And so in relationships, there's a lot of waves that we get hit with. And most of the time, we kind of get hit and we're knocked down. We want to get back up, and we want to kind of give negative emotions, back to whatever's happening. And so it's really understanding how to have soft starts to conversations, and avoiding criticism and contempt, so it's replacing those old habits, which is brain agility, with communication strategies that would bring him closer together with his wife. So he's able to have control over his emotions because he has a telescope to sort of watch the wave come in. And when the waves are at its appropriate level, he knows how he can get on the wave and surf it. So these type of habits that he's learned because of emotional, self-regulation has saved his marriage. And then he's also a teacher, as I said. So, many, having, bunches of 30 kids in a class every day, it's a challenge in the US to really not only control them behaviorally, but also to disseminate, the sciences that they need to learn or the mathematics that they need to learn. So he is able to keep his brain and his emotions in control over those external events. So I think that those are huge changes, and there are dozens and dozens. I can talk about benefiting from neuroscience and clinical psychology and performance medicine, narrative medicine.
Do you think that's my last question to you? Do you think that there will be a day that the parents pay attention to the kids' brain?
Yes, I think, well, there's an actress who used to be pretty famous, and it was called Goldie Hawn, and she has a charity that she is focusing on bringing uh, brains and minds into the focus of schools in schools. So when they're in the schools, then the parents can get involved, and so they can practice mindfulness with the kids. And so parents are, especially parents going through divorce, are hyper aware of sort of like their kids' emotions and changes in their behaviors, which is brain related, mind and brain related. So they, so they want to get their kids involved not only in therapy but also, as young as kindergarten in the U.S. There are programs that are around for parents who are interested in implementing this in their kids, because unfortunately in schools across the world, I mean, it's mindfulness and emotional regulation is not thought of as something serious,
Yeah.
you know.
Mm.
And if they're learning this at such a young age, and they're going to develop in a trajectory that is just going to be, truly beneficial, throughout every milestones in their lives, not only making their families better, their relationships better, but communities will also flourish.
Thank you so much, Rich, for sharing your insights with us today. Your expertise really added a lot to our talk and for the podcast. That's my first episode in English. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thank you and stay tuned for more episodes about rewiring the brain. Until next time, take care and keep your neurons firing. Thank you.